There is a moment in many relationships that almost nobody notices when it happens. Nothing dramatic occurs. No argument erupts. No betrayal is revealed. No door slams shut. The connection appears intact from the outside, yet something essential has already begun changing beneath the surface. Interest starts dying long before people admit it. And more often than not, it dies under conditions that feel completely safe. Most people assume relationships are damaged by conflict. They assume distance is the enemy. They assume emotional security protects connection. But some of the most powerful emotional shifts happen when nothing seems wrong at all. The messages still arrive. The routines still exist. The conversations continue. Yet the emotional atmosphere slowly becomes thinner, as if something invisible has begun leaking out of the connection one day at a time. The uncomfortable truth is that people rarely lose interest because someone became worse. More often, interest fades because observation fades. In the beginning, people pay attention to everything. They notice small details, subtle changes in mood, tiny shifts in behavior. Curiosity turns ordinary interactions into emotionally charged experiences. Every conversation contains uncertainty. Every interaction contains possibility. There is still something to discover. But certainty changes the way people look at each other. The moment someone becomes psychologically guaranteed, the mind often stops observing them with the same intensity. Not because the person became less valuable, but because certainty removes the need to pay attention. What once felt fascinating gradually becomes familiar. What once demanded attention slowly blends into the background. Familiarity kills observation. And observation is often what keeps fascination alive. Most people never realize this is happening because the transition feels comfortable. Comfort rarely announces itself as danger. It arrives disguised as stability. It feels like finally being able to relax. Finally being able to stop wondering. Finally being able to stop worrying about loss. Yet loss is often exactly what keeps attention awake. Think about how people behave when something feels uncertain. They check their phones more often. They replay conversations in their minds. They notice details they would otherwise ignore. Their attention becomes sharper. Their emotional focus becomes stronger. Uncertainty forces observation. It forces emotional awareness. When uncertainty disappears completely, attention often follows it. That is why some people wake up one day feeling strangely disconnected despite technically having everything they wanted. The relationship still exists. The person is still there. The communication continues. Yet something feels emotionally quieter than it once did. The excitement is gone, but no one knows exactly where it went. The frightening part is that interest rarely dies in dramatic moments. It dies inside ordinary moments. It dies when messages become expected instead of appreciated. It dies when affection becomes assumed instead of noticed. It dies when emotional access becomes unlimited and therefore invisible. People adapt to presence much faster than they realize. At first, someone's attention feels valuable because it is not guaranteed. Their affection feels meaningful because it could disappear. Their presence feels significant because it is still capable of being lost. But once the mind fully accepts that something will always be available, the emotional urgency surrounding it begins to change. People stop chasing what feels guaranteed. That truth sounds cruel until you realize how often it appears in everyday life. Most people have experienced it from both sides. They have watched themselves become less attentive towards someone who remained consistently available. They have also experienced the humiliation of realizing their own attention was no longer being received with the same enthusiasm it once was. That realization can be devastating. Not because someone leaves, but because they stop looking. There is a unique kind of loneliness that appears when you feel someone adapting to your presence. They still respond. They still talk. They still participate. Yet you begin sensing that your emotional impact is shrinking. You notice conversations becoming functional instead of engaging. You notice curiosity fading from their questions. You notice yourself carrying more of the emotional energy than you used to. And once you notice it, you cannot stop noticing it. You start looking for evidence everywhere. You replay interactions searching for reassurance. You compare current conversations to old conversations. You revisit moments when enthusiasm felt natural and effortless. Slowly, a painful question begins forming in the back of your mind. What changed? Most people search for a specific event. They assume there must be a reason. A mistake. A turning point. A single moment where everything shifted. But emotional decline is usually far less dramatic. It is often the accumulation of certainty. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. The connection stops feeling alive because nothing inside it feels capable of being lost. That is when emotional imbalance begins emerging. One person notices the shift before the other. They become more sensitive to changes in attention, more aware of inconsistencies, more invested in restoring whatever seems to be disappearing. At first their efforts feel harmless. They text first more often. They initiate conversations. They create opportunities for connection. They become more patient, more understanding, more accommodating. But beneath those actions, something deeper is happening. They are beginning to adapt themselves around fading interest. And that adaptation slowly changes people. You stop expressing disappointment because you fear creating distance. You stop asking difficult questions because you fear uncomfortable answers. You start accepting behavior that would have once bothered you because maintaining connection becomes more important than protecting your standards. Most people do not recognize this transformation while it is occurring. They think they are fighting for the relationship. In reality, they are negotiating with their own anxiety. The frightening part is how subtle the process feels. Nobody wakes up intending to become emotionally dependent on reassurance. Nobody plans to let another person's attention control their mood. Yet attachment has a way of quietly rearranging priorities until someone's enthusiasm begins determining your emotional state. A quick reply improves your day. A delayed reply ruins it. A small sign of affection feels disproportionately meaningful. A small sign of distance feels disproportionately painful. Eventually you find yourself reacting to emotional breadcrumbs with the gratitude you once reserved for genuine intimacy. And that is where many people lose themselves. Not through heartbreak. Through gradual adjustment. Through repeatedly lowering emotional expectations while convincing themselves nothing has changed. The irony is that the more attention begins disappearing, the more valuable that attention starts feeling. Scarcity transforms ordinary gestures into emotionally charged events. Suddenly a message carries more weight. A compliment carries more weight. A moment of enthusiasm carries more weight. Not because those things became more meaningful. Because they became less frequent. And the human mind has always been vulnerable to what feels scarce. That is why emotional inconsistency creates obsession so easily. People often assume they are missing the person. Sometimes they are. But sometimes they are missing access to a version of the relationship that no longer exists. A version where curiosity was effortless. A version where attention arrived naturally. A version where emotional energy flowed without effort or analysis. Late at night, this becomes impossible to ignore. You find yourself rereading old conversations. Not because you need information, but because you need evidence. Evidence that the intensity was real. Evidence that you are not imagining the difference. Evidence that someone once looked at you with a level of attention that now feels impossible to find. Memory keeps showing you who they used to be. reality keeps showing you who they are becoming. And the distance between those two versions creates its own kind of grief. Perhaps the most humiliating moments arrive when comparison enters the picture. You notice them becoming animated around other people. You hear excitement in conversations that no longer exists in yours. You watch curiosity appear effortlessly for strangers while your interactions feel increasingly routine. Very few experiences damage confidence faster than realizing someone still possesses enthusiasm. Just not for you. That realization forces people into emotional territory they rarely discuss openly. They begin questioning their attractiveness, their value, their importance, their ability to create emotional impact. The problem is not simply losing attention. The problem is watching attention exist elsewhere. That is when many people begin shrinking themselves. They speak more carefully, need less, ask for less, expect less, hope for less, all while pretending they are perfectly fine. But emotional suppression rarely creates peace. It creates distance between what people feel and what they allow themselves to admit. Eventually the relationship reaches a strange stage where everything still exists on paper. The connection survives. The communication survives. The routine survives. Yet neither person feels what they once felt. One person notices the absence more than the other, but both are living inside an atmosphere that no longer resembles what originally brought them together. Attention changes before love admits it. That may be one of the most uncomfortable truths about human relationships. People often wait for love to disappear before acknowledging a problem. In reality, the shift usually begins much earlier. It begins when observation weakens, when curiosity weakens, when emotional awareness weakens. By the time someone recognizes the damage, much of it has already happened quietly in the background. And perhaps that is why interest dies without risk. Risk forces people to notice. Risk reminds people something matters. Risk reminds people something can still be lost. Without risk, certainty expands. Observation fades. Curiosity fades. Attention fades. Eventually two people can remain connected while no longer truly seeing each other. And that may be the most painful part of all. Not being abandoned. Not being rejected. But slowly becoming ordinary to someone who once found you impossible to ignore. Because there are few feelings lonelier than realizing your presence no longer changes the emotional atmosphere of a room. You are still there. They are still there. The relationship still exists. Yet something essential has quietly disappeared. And by the time most people recognize what it was, they are already mourning it. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.